Two visionary entrepreneurs, two completely different approaches to business. Steve Jobs, the perfectionist marketer and the founder of Apple, and Elon Musk, who is the experimental engineer and is the CEO of companies like Tesla, SpaceX, and Neuralink. They have no doubt been titans of their industries and changed the world. Whether you like them or not, or whether you like their approaches, that's kind of irrelevant for today's discussion because no doubt they're interesting people and there's interesting things that we can learn from the ways that they run their businesses. So after reading both of their biographies by Walter Isaacson, and the link to the videos are going to be up here as well on the videos of what I've taken away from both of those biographies, I wanted to actually do a compare and contrast between styles of Steve Jobs as well as Elon Musk and think about some of the things that are kind of like in common and not, some of the failures, exploring some of the successes, and as well as what are some of the takeaways that we can use and employ in our own lives. All right, so to kick us off in terms of the similarities, vision is no doubt a common thread between both of these individuals. Both Jobs and Musk, they have a knack for setting really ambitious goals and taking massive risk to accomplish those goals. And Steve Jobs has a saying, he had a saying rather, that being able to kind of like bet the whole company on an idea, or in doing that every 4 or 5 years, it was like a really healthy thing in his mind for how Apple should be run. And that whole idea of really take a big gamble on something that you believe is really gonna push things forward for the company and for the industry, it's pretty cool. Jobs obviously has a reputation for being somebody who was very customer centric, and at the time, when he was building Apple, computers were these metal gray boxes that were just super non-user friendly. I mean, that term didn't even exist at the time, and he was so forward thinking that he kind of realized okay, people are not adopting the technology maybe as quickly as they can because it is hard to use, it's clunky, it's time consuming, and so he kind of started with the customer first and worked backwards. And again, that's something he oftentimes thought about, is how do you work alongside the customer, not necessarily just out engineer or over engineer, or add more complexity to really make things as simple and user friendly at the end of the day. Because the reality is, if an engineer or a CEO or whoever it is building a company, building a product, and it's not actually user friendly, it's not actually solving the need or the problem that a customer has, it's kind of useless. So it's best to start there and then work backward. Elon Musk, on the other hand, is really driven by trying to make humans a multi-planetary species. All that simply means is getting us to Mars. And he is so driven by that. It's been the connecting thread between all of his ambitions, whether it's at Tesla, in building SpaceX, and Neuralink, and even Twitter, maybe, believe it or not, rather X, as it's been called and referred to now. Basically, Elon, he realized by just doing a quick Google search that NASA has no programs, this is probably back in the early 2000s, that NASA had no intention or programs in place to actually get humans to Mars, or rather any sort of further exploration in Mars. And so he was you know what, I'm just gonna go figure this out myself. And he just picked up one day and decided, okay, let's go figure out how to build rockets. And initially he took a small team out to Russia to see if they could buy a rocket off of the Russians. Those negotiations basically didn't go super well. And so on the plane ride home, he thought to himself, how can I actually just make the rocket out of the rawest of the materials that go into the rocket, and kind of just work backwards from there, which is kind of a cool way to think about it. Obviously, there's a huge cost component to it, and that's one of the biggest challenges as well for both of these entrepreneurs, is doing as much as you can with as little resources as you might have, because there's no traction in the early days, but yet he was able to figure it out. Of course, both Musk and Jobs are innovative individuals that have pushed their businesses to think in innovative ways and stay ahead of the curve. Jobs, who was a student of Zen Buddhism and traveled to India in his life, he came back with a sense of intuition and sensing as a way to guide his business practices and decision making, versus Elon Musk, on the other hand, is a bit more analytical, and he relies very heavily on something called first principles thinking. First principles thinking is about getting to the core of a problem and then working back up by challenging the assumptions around that problem. And so for Elon and his team, it's very much about being analytical, and for Jobs and his team, it was very much about how can we use intuition and sensing. Of course, that is like, there's blurred lines between the two. It's not black and white, but those were sort of the prominent philosophies that both individuals have. Another one is that both Jobs and Musk are, of course, incredibly driven individuals, and that was sort of exemplified by the fact that they were both willing to work long hours. And of course, Elon is still alive. He's alive and kicking, and he's sleeping under his desk for hours at a time. Everybody knows that's his reputation. But at the same time, it's also very inspiring for the teams that surround both of them, because it's sort of like this mentality of working in the trenches. Like, if a manager is asking his or her employees to work long hours and to meet sort of a certain deadline that seems totally out of this world, and they see their manager actually working alongside them in the trenches to get it done, that's super inspiring. And I can say from firsthand experience, like having been working alongside managers that are willing to stay late at work and kind of like work on the weekends, it's super inspiring. And you kind of form a camaraderie around, you're tackling the world, you're tackling these big problems that are fundamentally like really hard to solve, but you're doing it together. Another similarity is that both individuals are uncompromising, and both Steve Jobs and Elon Musk, no doubt, they display this in everything that they do. It's all about setting a deadline that's slightly unrealistic. In some cases, for Elon Musk, it's about setting something that's super unrealistic, but getting your team motivated and grounded around this singular approach to getting there as fast as possible. And there's a saying, fail fast. Fail with good intention, because through failure, that's how you learn. That's how you learn faster. Of course, there's a flip side to this too, which is being uncompromising can mean you're stubborn. And in both of their cases, they are known to be very stubborn. And sometimes it is to a fault, as they also admit, as told by Walter Isaacson in the biographies. But also, it sometimes can really inspire individuals, as we're going to talk about in the next section. All right, so let's talk about some of their differences. The first one has to do with their style. Steve Jobs was known as a genius marketer, and just everybody almost takes for granted at this point how much of an impact the Apple brand has had on technology in general. And a lot of that, to Steve Jobs' credit, has to do with how he approached design and sort of creating really beautiful products. On the other hand, Elon Musk almost has a distaste for marketing. If you've noticed, Tesla has done zero marketing, and he has grown the company very much so by word of mouth, which is very impressive. And obviously he's an outspoken person in general, as we all know through his tweets. But at the same time, I do agree with Elon that it really is about product first. You can't out-market a bad product, and I think Steve Jobs would also agree with that. Marketing a fantastic product is only going to help accelerate its ability to get into the market and get into the hands or into the garages as much as possible for as many customers as possible. However, I think in today's society, we do often see really crap products that have slick marketing, and they don't last. They don't last long because fundamentally the product sucks. Another thing is Elon is probably a little bit more willing to experiment than Steve Jobs was. And this gets back to the stubbornness that I was talking about. Elon Musk, he is willing to be challenged on ideas if the data is there and if there's proof to kind of support those claims that are against his opinion. Steve Jobs, on the other hand, would shoot down ideas all the time from junior employees as well as senior executives. And it really took a few people that could really have the ear of Steve Jobs to set him down and say, hey, this is an amazing idea. And one example is multi-touch with the iPhone and the iPod Touch. This idea of multi-touch, it was actually something that was conceptualized as part of the design studio at Apple under Johnny Ive. But Johnny Ive was so afraid that Steve Jobs would shoot the idea down pretty quickly that he reserved it just for a one-on-one with Steve. And basically because he was afraid it would just get shot down. But it was an amazing, obviously, as we all know, we all use it. If you have an iPhone today, you're using it all the time. You might even be using it to watch this video. A second difference is around people skills. Now, Steve Jobs was known to be extremely charismatic, and so much so that people would get wrapped up in what he was saying and his vision for the future that they just kind of lose themselves. And as told in the biography, there's this concept called the reality distortion field. It's actually a reference to Star Trek, and people would get wrapped up in Steve's reality distortion field because Steve would basically tell you, like, no, you can do anything you put your mind to. And even if there was a super aggressive deadline and some of his employees were like, you're crazy, we're never going to hit that, I just don't believe it, he would almost like put his hand on their shoulder and say, look, I believe you. And he'd do it, I believe in you. And he'd do it in such a way that it was super charismatic. On the other hand, Elon Musk, he has Asperger's, and it makes him a bit more socially awkward. He's way more confrontational. At the same time, though, he's super, super sarcastic. And that's in part why I think a lot of people gravitate towards him, because he just breaks through the ice. He doesn't have any regard for, political correctness. And I think sometimes to his credit, he is able to just kind of challenge whoever he wants, whenever he wants, and he says whatever he wants. And I don't think Steve Jobs would have done it any other way either. I think he would continue to say whatever he wants, and he has in the past, of course, too. Elon Musk, though, has kind of a more abrasive style. Not all the time is it like very motivational, but he gets the job done in a slightly different way. Maybe by ruling in fear a little bit more, stepping into that, than maybe Steve Jobs. At the same time, the lieutenants at companies like Tesla and Neuralink and SpaceX, if they know how to deal with Elon and kind of like make sure that they're just kind of saying, yeah, we're going to try our best to hit these deadlines, it seems like Elon is good with that. And it's all about putting your best foot forward, trying your best to accomplish a deadline or a specific goal in mind. Even if you fail, it's perfectly fine. It's about trying to get as close to the mark as you can and giving it your all, really. I'd say the third difference has to do with focus. Now, Steve Jobs was known to be laser focused on core products at Apple and not expanding into new markets and business lines. On the other hand, Elon Musk is almost like the polar opposite of this. Elon Musk has a very broad vision, and that vision finds its way into all sorts of different areas, whether it's Neuralink, which is all about providing brain implants for people to communicate better with technology, or it's also fed its way into Tesla, which, to be fair, was something that he's always had a lot of interest in terms of how do we get a more sustainable economy going through electrification of vehicles. And then the obviously the big one is SpaceX getting individuals to Mars. But there is sort of a coherent story, as I also came to find out through the end of the biography that with Twitter, it seems like a little bit of an oddball at first, but in terms of an oddball, like in the portfolio of companies that Elon is running, there's actually something to be said about how it impacts AI, because it's a treasure trove of human sentiment and data. And there's potential ways to connect that to all of the other businesses that he's running. So it's to be seen what exactly happens, but basically the focus is very broad when it comes to Elon, and it was very narrow for Steve Jobs. Again, not one is necessarily better or worse. I think for me personally, I find that I do best when I'm sort of in a more narrow focus. But with that being said, Elon is supposedly a genius. So, his mind is always thinking and on 24/7, and he probably has some broad vision. So that's it, guys. Both of these visionaries have made significant changes in their industries and approached it in rather different ways, with also some underlying similarities too. If you're curious to learn more about Elon Musk and Steve Jobs as told by Walter Isaacson in his remarkable biographies, I've done 2 videos where I talk about some of the key takeaways that I took away from both of those books, and I will link both of those videos right above here. So I'll see you there, and until next time, take care.